This bill is to be commended, and I do so now.
I call Mojo Mathis.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back here after the summer recess. And I will take a short call on this bill. The Greens are supporting it. I was one of the members at the time in the Government Administration Select Committee that heard some of the submissions on this bill. And both during the statute amendment days, when we decided that actually the proposed changes were too substantial and potentially controversial to go through as part of the statute amendment. So now we're seeing it as part of the Charities Amendment Bill. And the thing that really struck me about this submission was the level of disagreement or lack of trust between the community and charities sector and between the hard-working volunteers from a very wide range of organisations that essentially form much of the fabric that holds society together, and just how much under stress they are as directly as a result of the national government policies has placed this sector under huge stress. And it is abundantly clear that we absolutely, as our colleagues Poto Williams and Honourable Ruth Darkson have already mentioned, that we need a full and comprehensive review of the Charities Act. Because the experience of having the National Council for Women going through the deregistration process and fighting to be re-registered, with all the massive implications that that has for funding and for their work, had sent shockwaves through the whole charity sector as to, that what they'd always assumed and understood among society as being work that they were doing for the common good for other people, all the volunteer hours, etc., were suddenly being put at risk because of this poor relationship, essentially, and differing policies and interpretations with the department. So, absolutely, the level of distrust was, to my mind, a real eye-opener and of major concern. And I would urge the new Minister, Alfred Narrow, whom I'd like to actually congratulate for his new appointment, to take this seriously, that this is a sector that's under stress. Go out and talk to them and rebuild that relationship so that they're not sitting there wondering one minute to the next if they're going to be sued, that they haven't got the resources to function, that they're going to suddenly be deregistered for something or other, that there is a fair and upfront relationship and communication between the government and the sector. And I said it's really to consider doing a full review, because that was promised way back when the first bill was first implemented. It never happened, and just constantly ignoring it and papering over the cracks is not going to work. There are too many good organisations in there to let them down in this way. And the other thing that really struck me was just the fundamental different legal interpretations of the proposed clause that got taken out of this bill. I was one of those who said we can't allow this clause to go ahead because we couldn't come to an agreement about what was the legal interpretation of that clause. We had officials telling us it was not a problem, it was just a minor amendment, it had no impact on society's ability to appeal decisions. And then there was the other huge paper by the foremost front-running charities expert lawyer in New Zealand telling us the complete opposite. Now, I don't have a legal background. There is absolutely no way that I could balance out the conflicting advice between what the officers were carefully trying to tell us and what the acknowledged as the frontmost lawyer in the country to tell us. So that is why I supported the removal of that clause altogether. Ultimately, I believe it can be resolved when there is better communication between the government officers and the sector. And with honest communication, I believe we'll get somewhere. Thank you. So we're to be supporting this bill and commend its progress through the House.
Mr. Speaker.
I call Clayton Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Great to see you, everybody back here